We can have discussions and you can ask questions at the end of each slide about each topic before we move on to the next topic. Some of the things will kind of come full circle. It might seem like we're missing something, but then at the end, we're going to talk about kind of the whole big picture. Can everybody hear me just fine on the stream?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Yeah, you sound great.
Excellent. Okay, so Amtgard Feast 101. I can advance my slides. Figure out how that's done. Which it doesn't seem to want me to. Oh, and we've crashed. So we're going to try that again. We pause your preview to save my resources. Okay.
We can see what's on your desktop. Dun, dun, dun.
Okay.
So I'm going to apologize to those watching on YouTube right now. I had some technical difficulties right at the very beginning. It's okay because the only thing we lost was like the kind of very first part. So, which was me rambling, the not important part.
All right, we'll try that again. All right, can everybody see me now? Or we're back to the slides, okay.
Yes, we are on the slides and it's looking good.
All right. So, you have 300 people at your event. You're supposed to cook for them. Maybe one of the first questions we should ask is, why are you cooking for them, right? Feast has kind of always been a part of Amtgard, and it's part of Amtgard history. From the very beginning, it was viewed as a central part of a gathering, right? If you go all the way back to Gathering of the Clans #1, you know, gathering for a meal is a part of any event, but a meal that is somewhat medieval centric was viewed as really part of the atmosphere of making an event seem like something special. So all Amtgard events have essentially had a feast from the very beginning. I mean, rarely will you see one without a feast. Throughout time, there have been notable Amtgard chefs, people that have done a lot of feast, sometimes across many kingdoms. A lot of raiders are pretty notable feastocrats like Greasy and Sir Crom. Some people out west, Baylorn is known for doing feasts up and down the west coast. We've had some in the CK in the past, like Brother Stefan of Annihilus, who did feast for many years, decades ago. So while some chefs seem to get all the credit and to be most notable, that doesn't mean that doing feast is essentially their purview. I've done the last 7 feasts in the CK, either leading them or being the sous chef for them. And I will admit it is a ton of work. And I like cooking, and I'm sure some people wouldn't mind me cooking the next 7 feasts, but I want other people to get a chance to cook feasts, because that's what it's really about, right? Is giving everyone a chance to learn a new skill and to give service to the club. So why cook feasts? Somebody has to do it, right? We'll get back to the or do they part later. You know, is it time to rethink Amtgard feasts, or do we continue as it is? That's a topic we'll address later. But for now, someone has to do it because it's an expected part of an Amtgard event. Cooking feast is a great service to the club. It's a great service to the club because it's highly convenient for attendees to be able to eat on site. Sometimes the nearest quality food source can be many miles away from a site, and having food available on site is highly convenient, especially for younger people who don't have a lot of money. They might not even own an ice chest to have brought their own food, or they might not have enough money to eat out and they could barely get their gate fee together. So being able to feed these people really enhances their enjoyment of the event, so they're not starving for the entire time they're out there, or don't have to make a 30, 45-minute trip to town to get some food and miss a good chunk of the event. And a feast, a well put together feast, enhances the event atmosphere. For all of those reasons we talked about earlier, being together, having a meal that's reminiscent of, you know, a medieval sort of event is even better. If you're thinking about cooking for 300 people or 10 people, the biggest key to success is having a complete mental picture of the entire process of conducting a feast from beginning to end. And this will mostly ensure success. All right. So what kind of types of feasts are we looking at? This kind of goes from the smallest to the largest. And if you're a new feastocrat, you kind of want to start at the top and you want to work your way up to the end. A park lunch may just be bringing a nice lunch for the 15 people at your park, something that you even made beforehand at home, and you just show up and you have it in the back of your car and everybody gets to eat lunch and everybody's happy. A park feast you may do for your park MidReign. It's something you might serve at the end of the day on a park day. So maybe you even do a little cooking on site. Some parks, have on-site barbecue grills and things like that. The next kind of step once you've graduated from cooking for your park is to think about doing a kingdom breakfast. This is the smallest event or smallest meal typically at a kingdom event. It's typically simpler, has less hot items. Kingdom lunches is kind of the next step up. These are typically single carry things. Maybe you're making a hot dog, maybe you're making a hamburger. So kind of a one single item menu. Kingdom event dinners. These are typically on Friday nights at a lot of events. They're less formal than doing main feasts, but you're still cooking probably 2 or 3 items for people. Kingdom event main feast. This is your big sit down meal. It's going to require you to think ahead. You're going to have to be cooking for larger numbers. And then inter-kingdom events are basically the same as the kingdom events, just tripling or quadrupling the amount of people. And the last one is the hardest meal of all, which is inter-kingdom main feast, when you can be cooking for anywhere from 300 to 700 people, which requires a lot of preparation, a lot of skill, and a lot of equipment. So typically that last one is reserved for people who have the means to be able to do so. So I would definitely not think about going anywhere near inter-kingdom events if you're new. Can everybody still see the slides and hear me just fine? Hello?
Yes, I'm muted, but yes.
Okay.
Yep, I'm still here.
Yeah, my screen is full screen, so it's like, I don't even know if Discord's still on now. When you're thinking about basic menu planning, we'll get into specifics later, you have to ask yourself a bunch of questions. What's an appropriate meal for the event? This really depends upon several factors. It depends on the size of the event. If you have 400 people, you're not going to cook risotto or some other really difficult sort of thing to make. So you have to think about, do people have the table to sit at? If your event doesn't have tables, do you really want to serve something that has 4 components that you have to eat with a knife and a fork and has gravy on it? Maybe not. So you always have to think about a lot of factors that influence the event and ask, well, what is an appropriate meal for this event? What's an appropriate meal for the time of year? I mean, on a frozen winter day, do you really want to serve tacos with ultra hot salsa? Probably not. Some other time of the year, that could be great. So you have to consider also the time of year that it is to the kind of food you're considering. What should you do? Well, you should consider those first 2 aspects, and then you should also think about what people like. You may love Indian food, but a lot of people hate Indian food. You have to consider the palates of your average Amtgarder. Amtgarders, by and large, are not foodies. They don't go to fancy schmancy restaurants. They like good, simple foods that are seasoned well. And so you have to really consider those things. You may make the best hot beef shawarma that anyone's ever had, but you have to ask yourself, should I do shawarma? Do people really like shawarma? Maybe. Maybe you do a hybrid thing where you're like, I'm going to make something shawarma-ish to kind of train people into it. Then you have to ask yourself, what can I do? What do I have the equipment to do? What do I have the skills to do? Do I need to practice? Is this possible? Is this high risk? Those are the kind of questions you should ask yourself. What should you not do? Well, you should definitely not do anything that's extreme or highly ethnic, because you're just not going to have a lot of success for it. You should not do things that have a high risk of failure. And we'll get into that more later. The next is sort of a mantra: hot, a lot, and an on time. After you've asked yourself all these questions when you're thinking about cooking feast, if you obey this, you really can't fail. If the food is hot and you have more than enough for everybody and you're on time, by and large, your feast is going to be successful. I always recommend that you publish a complete menu in advance. One, you may get feedback, and this might lead you to change something. And two, it helps people who have dietary exceptions to be able to notify you in advance if they have an allergy or something like that. We can see here I have a sample menu. So these are the kind of menus that I do that are released a month before feast. This was for Spring War this year. And you can see it lists when a meal will be, where it will be, who's preparing it, what it is, as well as all the toppings and all the drinks that are available. And this lets someone who has allergies or something kind of look into it and see if there's something that they may have an issue with to prevent you from having an issue during feast. And I always put my contact information, as you can see here, on the bottom so that people who do have dietary restrictions can get a hold of me. And there's always a disclaimer here. As you can see, lukewarm gruel may be substituted for all meals at chef's discretion. Just because you publish a menu doesn't mean you're bound to it, but it is a helpful thing to do. And I have these printed and available on site and posted in the kitchen area. People missing food is something you definitely want to avoid, and publishing a menu in advance with times will help to alleviate that. And if it's available on the website, at least they know where to be and when to be to get their food. Okay, next up, you've decided you can cook feast. You've thought about what you want to do. So you have to talk about money. How much money do you have to have? Who determines the budget? Typically, it's the autocrat is going to request a budget, hopefully in conversation with you as the feastocrat. You're going to tell them what you'd like to do, how much money you'd like to have, and the autocrat will petition either the monarchy or the BOD, depending on the kingdom, to be able to get their budget approved. And then the next question you have to ask yourself when thinking about money is, will your head counts be accurate? They tell you to prepare for 150 people, but you've only had 90 people at the last 10 events. Well, chances are you're probably not going to have 150 people. You don't want to overcook by an extreme amount, but you definitely do not want to undercook. Not having enough food is just a terrible thing, because inevitably the last few people in line are the people who are really hungry and they don't get food, and they become very sad and then begin to badmouth you all over the internet large and wide. To prevent this from happening, the Rogers Raiders always add 20% extra to the budget and to the food that we bring. It's called the Raider Fifth. So we never, ever, ever undercook, because we come prepared, and it's always worked into our meal plan that we add 120%. So if the expected event head count is 100, we cook for 120, because people will always eat extra food, and you can always break it back out at midnight for everybody who's been drinking all night on Saturday, and they will love you forever. Before we start to get into any numbers, does anybody have any questions so far about thinking about feasts, thinking about what you want to cook for feast, and how to get your money to be able to cook a feast?
I am looking right now at the YouTube stream. I don't see any questions. And I'm glancing at the Discord chats, and I don't see any questions typed.
We are.
But is there anyone who's sitting here that has a question?
I don't have
I'm
any
taking
questions.
extensive notes, so
No, we're like, I'm listening to every word, absorbing it all, and just I'm very interested. I just don't have any questions yet, but I'm like sponge. You know, I'm absorbing all this.
All these files and reference files and other things that I use, like my spreadsheet things, will all be available online, and that link will be given at the end of the presentation. Okay, so now that you've got some money, say you have 100 people coming, you have to consider what your true food budget is. Your true food budget is going to be your total budget minus your supplies, minus your fuels, minus your serviceware. So you're going to need some sort of supplies. We'll go over all this in more detail later. While you're cooking, you're going to need things in the kitchen. If you don't have an on-site supply kitchen, you're going to need fuel. Propane costs money, and it is not cheap. And then obviously you're going to need napkins and plates and silverware. And so you're going to have to calculate those costs and take them out of your total budget before you look at how much can I really spend on food. And your per person food cost is the single serving cost of an item all added together. So if we're going to have a serving of meat, say chicken breast, a serving of potatoes, and a piece of bread, we have to ask ourselves, well, how much does the piece of chicken cost? How much does the potatoes cost for each person? And how much does the piece of bread cost? And how you determine that is you take the single serving cost, which is the cost per item, if it's a single thing, like if you're buying individual rolls of bread, or it's the ounces per serving cost times the cost per ounce. So if I'm buying potatoes, and I'm going to say, well, each person is going to get 10 ounces of potatoes. So I have 10 times the cost per ounce, and my cost per ounce is the price per pound divided by 16. So I see, Walmart has russet potatoes on sale for 69 cents a pound. You divide that by 16, that's your cost per ounce. You want to give each person 10 ounces. You multiply that by 10, and that's going to tell you how much each person is consuming of your budget in potatoes. And for each item, you do that, and you'll get your numbers. And when you see my example spreadsheet later, you'll be able to see kind of how that works. For larger fees, I always recommend you have a spreadsheet to track all of this and to hold your receipts and to log your receipts. The last thing you want to do is get nailed by your BOD and be accused of taking funds from the kingdom. It's very important that anyone involved with any sort of expenditure during an event of kingdom funds keep adequate receipts and adequate tracking. And when you're running around cooking feasts like crazy, it's very easy to lose a receipt. It's very easy to forget that you bought something. And to avoid all those things, use a spreadsheet, make a spreadsheet, take pictures of your receipts, keep them all recorded in a secure location, both the physical copies and the digital copies, so that you're sure you don't have any of those sorts of trouble. Okay, so now you've got some money. You have a pretty good idea what you want to do, and now you need to go buy stuff. There's a lot of different places you can buy things, and depending on the size of your event, is going to kind of determine where you want to go. If you're going to cook for 30 people at your park for your park MidReign, probably don't need to go to Sam's Club, especially if you don't have a membership. You're just not going to make it worth it. Small stores can actually have good values on things. It's cheaper to go to Dollar General or Dollar Tree and get a $1 thing of 20 forks than it is to go to H-E-B or Walmart and get the 50-pack for $5. Maybe you just need 2 foil pans because you only have 2 little items for your park feast. Well, they're $1 a piece at Dollar Tree, and that's your cheapest place to get them because they're $1.99 at H-E-B. And Sam's, you get them for 50
Did Gavin freeze, or is it just me?
I think it's just you, Thad. He's continuing.
Because he's still talking.
And yeah, slides still look okay?
Now I can hear him. Okay.
Yep, the slide we're on purchasing, where to shop, and the benefits of each.
That's right. So if I want foil pans to serve in, they're $1 a piece at Dollar Tree, $1.99 each at H-E-B, and at Sam's they're 50 cents a piece, but you got to buy 50 of them, and you only need 2. So depending on, all of these stores have value in where you can buy things, and it's kind of up to you to think about the scale of it and where your best deal is going to be, because saving money on supplies and saving money on every purchase is the key to making the most out of your budget. You'll find that Mexican meat markets, carnicerias, often have much better prices on meat than American grocery stores. So maybe you go to a Fiesta Mart or a Supermercado El Rancho, and you can end up saving 30% on your meat purchase, and you can shovel that into making some of your other ingredients higher quality. So planning ahead looking at these different stores and what they have before you buy your things can help you to save a lot of money in the run up to an event. And this is all about thinking about what you need to buy, how much of what you need to buy in advance, and buying things in advance. I mean, if you see foil pans on sale somewhere and you're going to cook feast 3 months from now, well, just buy them and put them in your closet. I do that for Spring War extensively. I'll start buying things for Spring War 6 months before the event when they're on sale that are non-perishable. And that helps me to really milk. That's how I do 9 meals for an average of 250 people for the budget that we have. All right, so you bought some food, you've made the most of your budget. Now it's time to think about how we're going to cook it. It's always important to survey your site and know what will be available. This can save you a lot of headache. If it's a site you've been to before, well, you know. If you have been to the site before, but you never went into the kitchen, call the previous feastocrat. Ask them exactly what's available. Ask them about the condition of the equipment. They're like, oh, yeah, they have a stove. Well, they didn't tell you that only one burner works. These are the things you kind of want to try to find out. What does the site have? How functional is the equipment? Is the equipment at the site? What supplies can you bring? Well, that's a function of what you own and what you can transport. You say, well, my uncle has this 10-burner grill. That's great. But then you realize you don't have a truck to bring it to the event. So you need to have an awareness of what you can physically transport to the event as well as what you can get your hands on. And then, of course, you always should consider anything you can do ahead of time at home. So maybe you're like, well, if I grill all this on Saturday afternoon at my uncle's house, who's only 5 minutes from site, I don't have to worry about bringing his burner. I'll just grill all the meat and drive straight to site and be ready to serve it. So you can think about the flexibility that certain things can be prepared at home. Some things can be frozen. Maybe you cook a product and you freeze it ahead of time at home so you can cook it at your leisure. Then you bring it to the site frozen and let it thaw Friday to Saturday. So thinking about these things as it relates to equipment are very helpful. When you get to the kitchen, small things that people don't think about, work surfaces. How high are your tables? Do you have enough tables? Have you ever tried to chop 200 pounds of potato on a regular fold-out table? You won't have a back left when it's finished. You know, kitchen tables are 12 inches higher than eating tables. Think about these things. You know, will you be able to prepare your food on site? What is the porosity of all these surfaces? How will you clean them? Important to consider your work surfaces and what you have to work with. If you only have folding tables, get some cinder blocks. Find something on site to prop them up to save your back. Get those tables elevated. Knives. Make sure you have knives if you're preparing food on site for large amounts of people. I have just walked up to so many feasts I can't count and seen people chopping 50 pounds of onions with a paring knife. Make sure you bring the proper knives for the food you're trying to cut. I think last event, someone didn't know where the knives were and they gotten up before I had, and I saw them chopping potatoes with a dull metal spoon. And I've seen worse at Amtgard events. So try to make sure you have the knives that you need and the knives are sharp, and it will drastically cut your prep time. Cooking utensils. Well, you want to stir 30 pounds of green beans. That's awesome. But then you realize all you have is a 12-inch spoon. Later, we'll go into certain cooking vessels, but always make sure that you have the proper utensils to cook with. If you're going to be grilling things, you need something longer than an 8-inch pair of tongs, unless you want to have no skin left on your knuckles by the time you're done trying to flip 200 pounds of chicken on a grill because you only remembered to bring 12-inch tongs. Always think about the proper utensils to use with your cooking vessel. Next up is cooking vessels. What can cook what and how much? If you have 2 tiny little pots and you want to do mashed potatoes for 60 people, it's probably not going to cut it. You have to really think about, what do I have to cook in? Is it big enough for the task? And can I stir a 30-gallon pot with a 10-inch spoon? Probably not. So consider how your cooking utensils and your cooking vessels go together and what you're going to be cooking and if it's going to really be able to accomplish it. And when you're firing food on site, you have to ask, are your heat sources sufficient for the task? Home ovens are not powerful. We just don't really consider the difference between trying to boil 1 gallon of water and trying to boil 4 gallons of water. Because of some of the physics involved in heat loss, it takes way longer to boil with the same heat source 4 gallons of water than it does 1 gallon of water, and it takes longer than 4 times that. So it's an exponential sort of increase. And home stoves, if you see a site and they just have a regular home stove in there, and you know you have 120 people at your event, it's not going to happen. You have to really consider how much heat do the things on site produce, and ask yourself serious questions about how functional they'll be. I want to grill chicken breast, but all I have is a regular home sort of four burner grill. There is a limit to how much chicken breast you can produce on that each hour, especially if it's not completely functional. You really have to consider how much can be cooked with the heat that is available, and make sure you take that into account, because the number one reason that feasts are late is because people underestimate or overestimate the heat production capability of what they're cooking with. And feast time rolls around and they're only halfway through grilling their main item, or halfway through getting their water to boil. So not understanding heat availability and making sure that you have enough heat to be able to generate the food you want is super important. Food safety is also very important. Nobody wants to make anybody sick. And there's several things we have to consider. One is post-purchase storage. As I told you before, sometimes you can get a way better deal on something by ordering it 2 weeks out. But if it's a perishable item, you have to be able to store it. I'm lucky enough to have access to large cold rooms and stuff through my work, so I'm able to buy stuff in advance and chill it or freeze it before events. But you may be able to too. You know, maybe you can fit those 25 pounds of meatballs you want to make for your meatball sub in your home freezer. And if they're on sale for 50% off the week before, just buy them and put them in your home freezer. As you see in the top of this slide, 40 and 140 are your target numbers, right? You know, food that's refrigerated should be maintained at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and food that has already been cooked should be maintained above 140 degrees Fahrenheit. These are things you really have to remember, or you could have a really unfortunate incident on your hand if multiple people get sick. Transport storage. Well, so you were able to freeze your meatballs, but then you don't have an ice chest to carry them. And it's a 5-hour drive to the event. Do you really want those meatballs that were frozen sitting in your trunk for 5 hours? Probably not. You have to consider, how do I transport food that I've already purchased from the site of purchase or from my house to the event? And then when I get to the event, what is my on-site pre-cooked storage like? Do I have enough ice chests to be able to store all of this food?
I'm just going to pop in for just a second,
Yep.
Sir Gavin. We have some Canadians that think in Celsius, so I'm going to convert those temperatures for you. 40 degrees Fahrenheit is 4 degrees Celsius, and 140 degrees Fahrenheit is 60 Celsius.
Excellent. So our refrigeration options, on-site cold storage is obviously great, but very few sites will have their own refrigerators or their own cold rooms, although it does happen. Ice chests are the typical Rogers Raiders go-to. We have probably 10 to 12 very large ice chests that we use for a variety of purposes. For a lot of you northern folks, the weather may be your best friend. Maybe you just leave something outside because it's only 40 degrees outside. That certainly works too. It's all about maintaining the temperature, not the device that you have the food in. In Texas, we just leave our hot food outside on the afternoon and we hit 140 no problem. So we don't even need hot boxes around.
True story.
Right. When you're hot holding, remember, ice chests go both ways. Ultimately, they're just a insulated box. So we always also store our cooked food in the ice chest. So we have all of our food stored in the ice chest before the day of the cook. Then we cook the food. During the cooking, we sanitize our ice chest with bleach. And then when the food's finished, it all goes back in the ice chest. And now they are essentially hot boxes. So remember, they go both ways. They just insulate. They'll insulate hot and cold stuff equally well. If you're lucky enough to have true hot boxes like caterers use, that's even better. And your last option for hot holding is in the cooking vessel itself. Say your potatoes were cooked way early, well, you just leave them in the pot, put the lid on, and maybe leave the burner on low, depending on what it is, to be able to hold your food until time for service. The key thing here is that food cannot sit out for extended periods of time if it's a perishable item above 40 or below 140 if it is raw or cooked, respectively.
And again, for our wonderful northern visitors, that's 4 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius.
Does anybody have any questions so far about buying the food, getting the food to the event, making sure we have what we need to cook it and that it's stored properly?
I don't see any typed questions. The only one that came up, you already addressed, and that was making the slide available after the presentation. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will link it in the doobly-doo after the fact, once I get that link from Sir Gavin. Don't see anything on YouTube. There has been comments from Alara Drake and Surreal talking about Crom and a very large pit at Giddings and the dangers of wearing your night chain over open flame.
Yes. All right, food safety in the kitchen. Yes, things like we just talked about. Don't wear your nice chain over open flame. Make sure that all burning things are properly secured. If you don't know how to use a propane tank, make sure you get someone who knows how to use the propane tank to set it up, make sure it's leak-free and not going to cause an accident for anyone. Maintaining food safety in the kitchen, one of the primary ones is kitchen access control. It's an Amtgard event. People want to come hang out. You'll have every single person coming into the kitchen who just went to the god-awful, filthier than hell porta potties and just wants to come into your kitchen and hang out and lean up against the counters and touch all your things. During the days where you're going to be prepping food, it's very important to limit the access, who you control, or who comes into the kitchen. Otherwise, every single Amtgarder is going to want to wander in there at some point. Washing your hands is important. Washing the produce is important. Everyone who comes into the kitchen to help needs to wash their hands. Surfaces need to be cleaned, and they need to be cleaned appropriately. If it's a porous surface, that means you need to spray it down with the disinfectant and leave it on there for 10 minutes. All of these directions on the back of the bottle. Surface cleaners are not magic. Just because you sprayed some bleach on there and wiped it off 1 second later doesn't mean you did anything. And that's a real big misconception people have about how to clean things, is they think just because it touches it, it's like a nuclear bomb that goes off and somehow just magically killed all the bacteria. That's not the way it works. It takes time. And in general, I'm sure you even do this at home, you always want to work through your vegetable prep before you start throwing your raw meat on the counter. That way, all your veggies are chopped, they're put away or put in some other container before you start working with any raw meat proteins, to avoid contamination issues. However, some of you might have noticed that there's recently an onion poisoning thing going around, and that in many recent years, there have been lettuce recall after lettuce recall after lettuce recall. And the real aspect of what's going on with American food sourcing is that vegetables are truly more dangerous now than meat. I know it seems counterintuitive, and I know it seems hard to believe, but 12 of the last 13 food recalls for salmonella poisoning or E. coli poisoning have all been from vegetables, mostly lettuces and spinach. So safety, even with vegetables and washing things, is important. Kitchen staff and servers with illness. Make sure you ask anyone if they've been sick. This is how you get true food poisoning from a human, is if a kitchen staff member contaminates it. And then it has time to sit there and hot hold and for the bacteria to multiply enough to where it's going to sicken the entire event. When you're on the line, I will say that there's nothing you can do to prevent a single person from getting food poisoning. If you have a buffet line and someone who is sick comes through and deposits a spot piece of bacteria onto one of your food items, then the next person comes up and grabs that spoonful and eats it, it's possible that one person could still get food poisoning off your line, but it's not a systemic problem that you could have prevented. So you'll never be able to be perfect, but what you can prevent is a systematic spoilage of food that comes from a kitchen staff or server with illness. And the last thing, gloves are not enchanted magic items. Chefs don't use gloves because they don't do anything. And a lot of people, when they wear gloves, they think that they have somehow now protected from contamination. No, you haven't really done anything. The only thing you've been protected from is maybe if you had a cut and you were bleeding. A glove will transfer bacteria from your nose to the food just like a hand will, if not better. The same thing goes with everything that gloves touch. The gloves and hands are no different when it comes to transferring bacteria. So just because you're wearing gloves doesn't mean you're protected from anything at all. They do have their purpose, but preventing cross-contamination of food items is not one of them. You know, you can grab raw chicken with your gloves, and then if you grab your loaf of bread, well, you've just put items from that raw chicken right onto your bread, gloves or no. Food. That's one of the things that this presentation is not necessarily about. You know, we could go into long conversations about what you can cook for feast, exactly what kind of vegetable you should cook, and all these sorts of things. And we can certainly, if anyone ever wants to cook a feast, you can message me and we can talk about things that I've done or things that people have liked or things that you think you want to do. But the general rule is be on time. And as we stated earlier, hot and a lot and on time. If you do that thing, you really almost can't fail. People may say they don't care for it, or, oh, I don't like this, or I don't like that, but at least they won't dog you for a systematic failure. Use salt and pepper. Do not serve bland food. I don't know if you've ever watched Top Chef, but you know, even these guys get nailed all the time for just not producing salted food. No matter how good of a chef you are, you can still have food that is undersalted or underseasoned, as it's called, and be bland. Most people at an Amtgard event for feast have been drinking. They've been in the field all day. They're sodium deprived anyway. If there was ever a place you could serve food that is a little higher on the salt scale, an Amtgard event is it. If you serve well-seasoned food, people will like almost anything. Work on your flavors. We'll talk some more about this later. You know, taste your food. Does it taste good? You do have a chance to fix things. Don't cook 60 pounds of something, get to the buffet line and be like, oh, that doesn't taste so good. Taste your food early. Taste your food while you're cooking so that you can fix it. You're like, well, I'm just going to dump a half a bottle of sriracha in here and nobody can tell anyway.
I've got a question from the stream. It wasn't typed out, but someone put that they had one. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Lady PMS Sparkle, if you'll please go ahead and unmute your mic and or jump on video and address your question now.
Okay, so with the whole thing of on time, a lot, and hot and such like that, this is kind of like a worst case scenario. And it's most likely happened in the past at many events, where you have a perceived amount of people coming through gate, and you do your math and your scaling. You're expecting more people to be there for the actual feast, opposed to some of the previous smaller feedings. What happens if you get like an obscene amount of people that show up last minute? How do you recover? Like what? Like going beyond the Raider 5th, like. There's like extra 50 people. What can we do?
Sure. So that depends on two factors. One, you said, right, if you have the Raider 5th, typically and most times you're covered, but oftentimes you're not. So how I deal with this is I maintain a constant contact with the gate crack, right? And like every 2 hours, I call them and ask them how many people are there. And if it's climbing unexpectedly, then I will send someone to the nearest grocery store to up the food amount at the last second. And I have done that twice for Spring War. Luckily, at Lone Star, you know, HEB was only 10 minutes away. But yeah, more than once, I have some people. I'm like, I need 30 more pounds of beef now. Go get it. and maintaining, you know, I did that for dinner because at 2:00 I called the gate person and I said, "How many people are here?" And they're like, "I think it was a Thursday." And I'm like, "What do you mean there's 260 people here?" And so, yeah, maintain a relationship with the gate rat so you always know who's there. And if you're not going to be on time, change early. Like before, sometimes I say dinner's at 6, but then I'm like, we're not going to be ready till 7. I changed that at 1 p.m. And that's more than enough time to get the word out. But what you don't want to do is tell no one so that people are lining up and you're like, oh, it's going to be 7. But a few hours is more than enough to spread word through camp that dinner's going to be late. So if you can't be on time, let everyone know as early as you can. And if you don't have enough, you know that by communicating with the gate rat.
Cool. Thank you.
And thank you. Another question that comes up is in the question regarding seasoning and saltiness. What if there's someone out there that has or needs a low sodium diet? How are you going to handle the seasoning for there?
Typically, there is, I always send out dietary requests, but you're right, not everyone will respond to that, especially for a smaller event, right? So what I do is I always keep something back separated out that it doesn't have anything added to it. Like if I'm cooking green beans with onion and bacon and garlic, I will always maintain in the back in the kitchen a small thing of green beans that's just green beans. That's unseasoned, that's anything. That gives me plasticity. So when that one person comes up and is like, oh, I have a low sodium diet, or oh, I can't eat pork, or oh, I'm allergic to onions, I still have that small portion. And usually it's only enough for like 3 or 4 people that I keep back. But I do keep a little bit back of each ingredient that's not seasoned, that's not mixed with anything, so that I can address those kind of issues. Just keep a small amount in the kitchen in the back. And then I can have one of my servers or something. I tell them it's going to take them a minute. If someone walks up to the line with a dietary restriction at the last minute and didn't email me, they're just going to have to wait to get their food. And that's only fair. It's not a restaurant. I'm not getting paid. So I think it's a fair exchange that if you didn't email in your dietary restrictions, well, you can wait 15 minutes to get your special to order plate. And no one is really balked at that. So even if it takes a little bit longer, I keep some back and I say, okay, we can have this for you, but you're going to have to wait 15 minutes and we'll bring it out when it's ready.
Thank you very, very much. I don't see any other questions so far. There have been comments on the chat that are just kind of agreeing with it, is that sometimes those that have specialty diets will bring food to make up for things that they can't have from feast, but that it's absolutely 100% fair to ask someone who's come up last minute for you to prepare a special plate for them because they can't have something that you have already prepared, to ask them to wait for a few minutes to make sure that gets made for them. So thank you.
And of course, I always prepare a vegetarian option, for the meat protein, and I'll have that kind of hidden, and they'll have to ask for it, because if you leave it out where it's visible, everybody's going to want it. And typically for me, that's going to be a combinations of mushrooms and dense squashes so that it has a meaty feel. But yes, always prepare at least 3 servings of a vegetarian thing to supplement the protein. Vegans, I don't cook necessarily for vegans unless they ask in advance. Sometimes I will, and my vegetarian single item is going to be vegan. But that's where it can help having the separate ingredients so that I can get them their green beans and onions without the bacon, because I kept them separate in the bag. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself here. All right.
Just giving you a quick heads up on the time. You've got about 10 minutes.
Okay. So, yeah. Drinks. If you know me, you know I hate doing drinks because I always forget about them. The feast rolls out. I'm like, look what great food we've had. And the first person in line is like, what is there to drink? I'm like, oh, my God. So I like to have multiple options with sugar sweet, unsweet, artificial sweetener available. Typically powdered lemonade and iced tea made with real iced tea. Prepare the drinks in advance, way in advance. The last thing you want to be doing is running around looking for coolers, mixing tea, trying to find ice when it's time to serve feast. Should you do prepared drinks or self-serve? Self-serve takes a long time. People have a plate of food in their hand. They're trying to use the dispenser. to fill up their cup that's been iced. I find that for any event of sizable size, you want to have your drinks at least enough, called sandbagging, like 50 drinks already on a table and ready to go so people can grab them. Have multiple options for drinks, have sweet and unsweet, have artificial sweetener available, prepare them in advance. So now you've cooked all this food, hopefully successfully. Service styles, you have three options basically: family style, buffet lines, and plate service. Family style is where you just bring a tray of each item to each table and each person kind of serves themselves. So this takes the least amount of servers. You have basically a pile of forks and napkins and plates already on the table, and each table basically gets a pile of food and everybody eats, what they will. This is easy for you to serve. It doesn't require a lot of people standing at a buffet line. Downside is some people may not get food. One big table, may eat twice their weight. It doesn't have any portion control. So while it's easy to serve family style, the downside is controlling how much people eat and making sure that everyone gets fed. My preferred style is buffet lines. This is where I always establish 2 buffet lines that come in from opposite directions so that there's no crowding, and the lines are staffed with servers spooning the food, and people go to a separate location to get their drinks that are already set out for them. And there will be somebody manning a drink station to serve, to be able to help with drinks. So buffet lines are my preferred service. For smaller events and ambiance, you can do plate service, where you're back there making plates and people are walking it out. Kind of like a restaurant almost. And this may be very elegant for a smaller feast or a more intimate venue. The downside is everybody gets everything, where people may not want things or whatever. And they're like, oh, now I have to pick around my green beans. So that's kind of a downside of plate service, but it can be a good effect for smaller events. Service is where portioning happens. So when your servers are servicing things, especially in buffet lines, the size of the spoon should determine the size of the portion. That way, there's no question. Ice cream scoops are good for this. Deeper weld ladles are good for this. Spoons to where only so much fits on it are good for this. And that's how you use the utensil to control your portions. You just tell your servers they get 1 spoon of this, 2 spoons of that, 1 piece of this. So use your utensils in your buffet line to control your portioning. And if you have seconds, just wait to the end and make a loud and clear announcement when people can come through and eat more food after you're sure everyone's been served. Servers, recruit and train them in advance. This is very important. Scurrying around for servers at the last second is the #1 way to make your feast late, and you definitely don't want to do that. So make sure they're recruited, make sure they're trained, make sure they know what's expected of them, and then make sure you give them the recognition they deserve. And we'll talk about awards in a second. Cleanup, as many areas, is always very important. Have someone to wash dishes, or you're going to be doing it by yourself at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night, and nobody wants to do that. Make sure you have people to help clean up the service area. Do not leave the service area trashed. Have someone to manage your trash. You do not want to be cooking around piles of trash bags. Always be thinking about how to manage your trash in advance. Did I bring enough trash cans to the service area? Do I have enough trash cans in the kitchen? Think in advance about trash management, and you'll be thankful. The final cleanup, very important. Do not leave unspoiled or food at an event site. You'll come back to a nasty surprise the next time you're there, or the site owner will give you a very nasty call and may not let your kingdom back for the next event. So make sure you clean things up. Make sure you respect your site when you're done. One of the last things I want to talk about is menu elevation. This is what I call cooking better food. How do we do that? Well, make sure you have the proper cooking temperatures. If you want to grill chicken and you're trying to put 60 pounds of chicken on one grill, you're just going to have a bunch of steamed chicken in the end that's not going to be very palatable versus a nice piece of chicken with grill marks. So you always want to make sure you have enough heat to get the texture and temperature that you're looking for. Overall ingredient quality. You're making a recipe. I'm going to make Alfredo for a bunch of people, and it calls for parsley. Are you really going to go spend $3 on a can of dried parsley from Walmart that died sometimes back in 1982? No, get a fresh bunch of parsley. It's 60 cents a bunch. In 2 bunches, $1.20 will give enough parsley for the entire event, and it's a fresh herb. Think about the ingredient quality. Canned green beans. It's easy, but it's also easy to boil fresh green beans. Bread quality. Bakeries, your local grocery store will bake you bread to order that is vastly superior to any stabilized bread. You don't want to be serving things on Wonder Bread. Nobody comes to an event and wanting to have a quality feast and eat a slice of Wonder Bread. Herbs, condiments, and sauces is kind of one thing I'm known for. I always elevate my condiments. We'll have mayonnaise, but we'll also have a curry sauce, and we'll also have a roasted garlic aioli. And these are all based off of these condiments, but I just elevate them. And then I always do a sauce. As Anyanka knows, I say, never throw away flavor. So during the course of the event, I'm always saving, the meat drippings and all that, and making a sauce that kind of binds the meal together. And menu elevation looks like this. Sad hot dog. Sure, this may be fine for your first feast ever when you're doing a park lunch, but this is an industrial hot dog on an industrial bun and that people would slather probably with a fork that's already crusted with mayonnaise and fingerprints from 40 different people. Or you can have like what I serve at events. This is also a sausage on a bun. But here we have fresh herbs, which is parsley in this case, fresh scallions, house pickled onions that cost me nothing to make, Parmesan cheese. Under there this is a meatball sub, I think. I thought it was sausage. But this is an Italian meatball sub, and you can just see the difference in elevating the quality of each ingredient. We go from commercial bread to bread I hired the bakery to make. It was only a 8-cent increase. And then condiments out of a squirt bottle, so they apply nicely, and fresh herb toppings. And you're left, they're both still meat on a bun, but one is vastly superior to the other. So as you're thinking about what you're going to make for a feast, think about the small things that you can do to elevate it. So prepare yourself for success. Plan ahead. Recruit your kitchen help and servers in advance. Consider all your points of failure and have backup. This is what's going to allow you to succeed, to be able to really execute a feast that everyone's going to like, and that's going to get you the recognition that you deserve for all the hard work that you've put in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gavin. I know that you've got the future of Amtgard events. We're running real close to time, so I'll let you finish this out, and then we'll say thanks.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks, guys. Anybody have any final questions as we're waiting for Anyanka to come on? I think she's here, right?
That was
Yes.
amazing. I don't have any questions. I'm just absorbing it all.
All right, so I'll grab those links, those files for you, and I'll get those in the doobly-doo down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're in Discord, Gavin, if you don't mind, if you know how to put it in the general chat, that would be awesome.
Yep.
If you don't, throw it to me on Facebook Messenger, and I'll transfer it over for you. Thank you so much to those watching us on YouTube. Stick around, because at our next session, we have Baroness Anyanka from... Is she from the Wetlands?
Yes.
She's from the Wetlands.
Yes.
I got all confused.
Ironwood.
She's from Ironwood, out of the Wetlands, and she'll be actually cooking a feast, much like Sir Gavin was talking to us about, and she'll be doing that live. If you have your ingredients, those were posted several days ago on Facebook. I'll also get those posted here in a bit. So if you have any of those ingredients lying around your kitchen right now, you can definitely cook along with Anyanka, and we can see what kind of delicious things that you come up with. So stay tuned on YouTube, Discord, hang out.